Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. And thank you for coming.
And don't arrest us.
A couple of months ago, I was talking to somebody outside, and they was telling a war story like cops tend to do when they're together. And Mary Lou heard us, and she said, "Would you like to do this as a talk for somebody, for an audience?" I said, "Yeah, but I don't think anybody would be interested." She said, "Oh yeah, I think they would." So here we are. That's how we got here today. I'd like to give you a little of my background. I started out, I was a city kid, grew up in Salty, and never had any desire to be a policeman, never liked policemen. You know, we were street kids, we really didn't, but I thought of it today. I still know the names of the 3 beat cops that covered our beats after 60 years. Gene Dumas, Dave Eisenblum, and Johnny Kelly. I still remember their names, so they had some import to us and they had some effect on us. But we weren't trouble kids. We were all in CYO, and my friend Mike Logan is here today. We were in drum corps together, and what were we, 12, 13, 14? Yeah. So we go back a ways. But anyhow, I also not only didn't like cops, I didn't like school. So when I reached 16, I quit high school. And this isn't for me. I can go to work and make money, and I can always make money. I don't need this. Well, I found out you really can't make money. I went out the door and was making $1 an hour. That was back in, what, 1956. So I ended up going in the Navy. And when I went in the Navy, I was very fortunate. I had a lieutenant commander that convinced me. I'm sorry, I thought I shut that off. that's my ringtone.
Names have been changed to protect the innocent.
And I didn't do that on purpose either. But I had a lieutenant commander in the Navy on the ship I was on, the USS Ingraham, who pushed me until I took the GED exam and got my GED certificate. And when I got out of the Navy, I went to the school department, and I had scored high enough on the GED that they gave me a high school diploma. So I had the high school diploma. And in 1968, my brother and a couple of other guys were taking the police exam. And my brother Eddie said, "Why don't you come with us and take the police exam?" And I said, "Nah, I was working in a steel foundry, and I was making like big money. I was making about $2.40 an hour." Yeah, so what do they need the police for? And the police at that time paid $108 a week. That was in 1968. So he went on the police in 68. I stayed at the foundry. I got promoted to foreman. I was now making like $180 a week, which was pretty good money in those days. In November of 1969, the foundry went out of business. And there I was with 4 kids and no job. So I called civil service and said, "Where do I stand?" They said, "There's a class in February. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't take it, you're off the list. You have to retake the exam." So I'm telling you, I never had a burning desire to be a cop, but it was a job. So I took it. And I fell in love with it. I absolutely, if somebody had said, "What would you like to do for work for the rest of your life?" I don't know what I would have said, but that was what I ended up, and that was what I liked doing. I loved it. I loved going to work every day. I enjoyed the job. I had some bosses I didn't care much for once in a while, but most of them were pretty good. So anyhow, started off in February of 1970. Entered the police academy, which was located in the south end at Berkeley and East Berkeley Street in the old District 4 police station up on the 2nd floor. And I didn't have a car, so I walked from Salty to the south end every morning to go to work. And I didn't have a car because I lived in Salty, and we had transportation. I didn't need a car. So anyhow, 16 weeks in the academy, 16 weeks of half-day boredom and half-day excitement. The boredom was in the academics, learning the state laws, city ordinances, first aid, all these necessary things that you have to know to be a policeman in Boston. You can't operate without it, because it's only a very small percentage that actually involves wrestling with people and putting cuffs on them and arresting them. A big part of being a policeman is being a social worker, trying to help people with their problems, trying to get things straightened out. That wasn't the part I liked till much later. I liked arresting people. Okay? And I worked in Roxbury, and there was no trouble finding people to arrest. There was plenty there. And I'm not bragging, but just to give you a number of what it's like in Boston, I was involved in between 1,500 and 2,000 arrests in my career. And that sounds like a lot, but in the area I worked, it was probably average. And it wasn't until much later in my career that I got involved in big cases, and the arrest numbers went down, but the importance of the arrests became more stable. So I worked on patrol, and patrol in those days were two-man cars, all two-man cars. There was no such thing as a one-man car. And we considered a shift a failure if we didn't make an arrest. You had to go out and make an arrest, partly because there were a lot of bad people out there, and partly because we got paid for going to court. And we needed that money to supplement the pay, because the pay was lousy. So we were out there, we were like hunters. We were out there looking for people to be bad so we could arrest them. But also the training and the education we got working in an area like Roxbury. I later became a homicide detective. I actually saw more bodies as a patrolman than I did as a homicide detective. Because in homicide, by the time we got there, the bodies were gone. They were moved. What we had was a crime scene to work with and witnesses, but we didn't see a lot of bodies. As the guy in uniform that gets there on the 9/11 call, he's the one that sees the bodies. But we did see a lot of bodies. And give you an idea of what makes people kill people. It's not major things. It isn't, I'm going to kill him because I hate him. I've responded to calls where a guy killed his son. He shot him to death. And why did he shoot him to death? Because the guy had cooked a can of chunky chicken soup. And while he was in the other room, the son came in and took the chunky chicken soup and ate it. And when the father came out, "You ate my soup," boom, he shot him to death. That's what happens. I had a guy killed because he killed the gas station owner because he went in to get an inspection sticker. And the guy scraped the sticker off and then found a muffler that wouldn't pass. So he put a rejection sticker on the car. And the guy killed him for putting a rejection sticker. So people kill for any number of things. It doesn't have to be a big major case. And when you think of it as, again, as patrolmen, we get there and say, "What happened?" The guy says, "He ate my soup, so I shot him." Put the cuffs on him and take him away. That was it. Had crazy cases. I had a guy on Quincy Street in Dorchester. At that time, I was partners with Bobby Gill. Marilyn knows Bobby Gill well. Bobby and I were partners for a number of years. And when we pulled up to the scene, it was like a 90-degree night in the middle of August. People all over the street. And the guy's laying his head down on the stairs. And we get there. I said, "Oh boy, look at this." And people are all around and we're waiting for trouble to start. And I went up the stairs. I said, "What happened?" He says, "She shot him." So I go over her and I said, "Did you shoot this guy?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "What'd you shoot him for?" He messed with everybody. He did this, he did that. They told us 20 things, and then the whole crowd get in. "Yeah, he did that. He stole from me. He did this. He raped my sister." All these kind of things. She finally got fed up and she shot him. I said, "What'd you do with the gun?" She says, "It's in the hallway." In the hallway, it was a .22 rifle. Got the .22 rifle, put the cuffs on her. She's under arrest. We got another murder pinch for nothing. It was like a freebie. So we get into court. The judge's name was Elwood McKinney, a black guy, probably one of the first black judges in the Commonwealth. Terrific, terrific judge. Loved cops. We could do no wrong. He was a real law and order guy. And in those days, they had what was called a probable cause hearing, where the arresting officer would go in front of the judge, tell him basically what happened, and he would decide if there was enough to bind the case over to the grand jury and send it up to Superior Court. So I got up, he said, "Officer Miller, what happened?" I said, "Well, Your Honor, this, that, the other." Told him what happened with the stories we had, how bad this guy was. "Are there anybody here for the defense?" He appointed a defense attorney. There were a few people from the neighborhood there. Put them on the stand, told the judge what happened, what a bad guy this was. McKinney looked around, he finished up, and he said, "You know, sometimes some people just need to be killed." So I'm finding no probable cause on this case, and let the guy go. Let the woman go, I'm sorry. Let the woman go. He says, "That okay with you, officer?" I said, "Fine with me, Judge. I'll bring you back another one tomorrow, just like it." There's plenty of them out there. The judges in those days were so good. Sammy Eisenstadt, and police and judges and lawyers, it's like a big family. Sammy Eisenstadt was a judge in Roxbury Court that we went in front of quite often. When he lost a leg to, I think, to diabetes, and he was in the Beth Israel Hospital, and we went over to see him and took a couple of Spuckies, sub sandwiches. We called them Spuckies. We brought food over to him. And he saw us coming through the door, of course, we're still in uniform. And he hollers, "Nurse, nurse, quick, they're coming to arrest me." So his son later was an assistant district attorney that I did many cases with in Roxbury Court and also in Suffolk Superior Court. And when I retired, I became a private detective. And I sent notices out to a lot of the lawyers that I knew that I was doing this. And I get a call from Joe Eisenstadt, who was the grandson of Sammy Eisenstadt, to work cases for him. He was also a lawyer. So it's a big family. It all goes back and forth. And I did that anyway, on patrol in uniform till 1983. And in the meantime, I saw what was happening in police work across the country. If you wanted to get promoted, you better get to college and get a degree, because they're not promoting people with high school diplomas. So I went to Massasoit Community College, and in 1975 I got an associate's degree. And for the next 7 years I went to Northeastern, Boston State, UMass, picked up a class here, a class there, a couple of classes over there. And in 1982, I got my bachelor's degree. But I got a bachelor's degree in management, because everybody had bachelor's degrees in law enforcement, and I wanted to teach. So I taught for 6 years at UMass Boston. I taught a course called Moral Issues and Ethics in the workplace. It started out in police work, but it didn't work because all we got was cops, and we didn't want a class full of cops. So we made it in the workplace. Now we got a lot of social workers and cops. I teamed them together so they had to work with each other and learn about each other, because there was that big barrier between cops and social workers. So I did that for 6 years. I got promoted to acting sergeant in 1990. First, I got bypassed a couple of times because of minorities. We didn't have enough minorities, so put the white guys aside and promote the minorities. So that was okay. So in 1983, I got a call from Ray Flynn, who was the mayor at that time, that I grew up with in Southie and went to grammar school and high school with. I got a call from his office to come in and see him. And I went in, and he wanted to form a sexual assault unit, or we called it at that time a rape unit. And would I be interested in doing that? The reason he called me, because there was a state law passed in 1982 requiring that any police officers that investigate sexual assault cases had to be certified to investigate them by the Criminal Justice Training Council. So I went and got certified. I was the only one on the Boston Police at the time that was certified to do a rape investigation. So when Ray wanted to do this, and he asked me if I was interested, and I said, yeah, it'd be a good thing to do. He said, I want it done right. I want it fully staffed. I want you to set up a budget, do the whole thing. And he said, I want you to work with this policewoman that they had from downtown. I said, yeah, okay, I can work with anybody, basically. So she and then we got a couple of people, a nurse friend of mine and another friend of mine from the Criminal Justice Training Council. We put the unit together, we got a budget together, we checked departments all over the country, how many people did they have and so forth. And we started up the Boston Police Sexual Assault Unit. My reward out of it was I got promoted to detective. I got out of the suit. And we started out slow, but it worked. It really worked well. One of the problems that happened in the city's broken up into sectors. District 4, the cutoff line was Mass Avenue. Then you come into District 2. Well, we were on different radios. So I would get a rape call on District 2 and handle it and give it to the detectives and so forth. And a guy on 4 would get a rape call and give it to his detectives, and nobody knew what the other guy was doing. And we had serial rapists that were working around the city that nobody knew about because it was all separated. So one of the things we set up was any rape now had to come through the sexual assault unit. And then we were on top of things and we knew about what was going on. One of the cases, and this is one of my pride cases, was a young lady named Pam. And I got a call about 3 in the morning from 2 patrolmen down at District 1, which covered the combat zone, who had got a call to the hospital for a victim. And it was this young lady, Pam, who was 18 at the time. And they called the unit. I was on call, so I went and I met them down there. And Officer Joe Dashner and Mary Boyle, I think. Mary Boyle, 2 officers. And I met this young lady. And she was in the hospital because she had been whipped with coat hangers by her pimp. She didn't make enough money, and that was the punishment. They took coat hangers and they whipped her with the coat hangers. They had an apartment out on Commonwealth Ave in Brighton. So she managed to make her escape, went to the hospital. I got called, I went in, talked to her, photographed her injuries. Unfortunately, you get a little cynical because a lot of times the hookers would call and say they were raped, and all they were looking for was someone to get their money for them. Yeah, hopefully you'll find the guy that raped me because he didn't pay me. And you get a little cynical, but we were new at this. So we were ready to give it whatever we could. And they were great, the 2 young cops, because I worked with her for about almost 3 days straight. Through the night, into the next day, into the next night. I hooked up with some detectives from Cambridge, Charlie Linehan and another guy, Joe something. And the long story short, we ended up, went up to Commonwealth Ave, got warrants. I called the district and got some guys to help me. And we went up there and we arrested 3 guys and 3 women, 3 other hookers who had also beat her because they were told to. So we arrested all of them. And then on the Cambridge part of the case, they closed down 2 houses of prostitution over there and arrested 4 pimps. And the information we got from there, we worked with the New Jersey State Police and took off a whole group down there that were trafficking women back and forth. So it was really...
How did Pam get there? How did she get there? Was she a runaway or was she... How did she become in that situation?
Pam started when she was 13 years old. She's from St. Louis. And she started turning tricks in a truck stop when she was 13 years old. Came from a very messed up family and so forth. Got taken over by the pimps, got brought to Boston, among other places. So anyway, we made a lot of arrests. We got some serious time on them, 25 years and up. And the best part of the story was that she stuck with us and she helped with the prosecution. And we got her a place to live, and our secretary in the unit at the time, I think her sister had lost a lot of weight and had a ton of clothes that she couldn't wear. So she brought them in for her. And I got her a job through an organization downtown. And if you work downtown, you might have seen her. She was in an Easter Bunny suit outside Fannie Farmer's, handing out candy. But she did what she had to do. And she later went to work for another Boston company. She and the boss fell in love. She was a knockout. She was 18, 19 years old then. Very attractive girl. And he called me at the office, wanted to take Marilyn and I out for dinner to thank us for doing this. And we ended up down the North End, and we had lobster fra diavolo and all kinds of good stuff.
Her mother was there too.
Was her mother there? Yeah.
Her mother came in.
She never forgets. She doesn't have a statute of limitations. But anyhow, it was a real nice turnout, and she ended up marrying the guy. He owned his own company in Boston. She went to work for him, and she ended up as his major assistant. And that was a good story. That was a good ending. And I did that for a couple of years, and I happened to be on call one day. We were over in District 14 in Brighton, and I got a call from the front desk and said there's a customs agent here that wants to see somebody from sexual assault. I said, send him up. So he came up, and it was Jim Burke, who lives here in Canton, actually. And it was more or less a courtesy call. They had a search warrant they were going to do in Brighton. And they always like to touch base with the local guys and make sure that, there was no problem. So I said, yeah, I'll go with you. So I went with him. We arrested a guy for possession of child pornography, which these guys had delivered to him. And arrested him, took him back. We took him down to headquarters, and I get tied up with them for a couple hours. And it worked out pretty good. And about 3 weeks later, I get a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office that they were setting up a task force to deal with child pornography cases in Massachusetts and all New England. And would I be interested in joining this task force? So I said, well, I'd be interested in it. Let me come in and talk to you about it. So I did, and it worked out. It was a pretty good job. And I was a special deputy U.S. Marshal for that period. So I did that for 4 years. And the special deputy status gave me federal authority, limited federal authority, just on child pornography cases. But we did cases all over New England. And it was good. It was really good stuff because there was no innocent people being arrested. You know, sometimes you arrest people and you don't want to arrest them, but you have to. They're more stupid than criminal. But they do what they did. So I did that for 4 years. But everybody we arrested was a bad guy. They were buying child pornography. They were selling child pornography. They were molesting children. They were just every bad thing you can think of, they were doing. So we made in 4 years, and as I said earlier, when you do serious cases, the numbers on arrest drop a little bit. But we still arrested about 150 people over that 4 years. And these were lengthy, long-term investigations. We set up a magazine. We had our own magazine called the American Sensuality Society. And what we would do is guys from customs would make child pornography grabs at customs when they were, coming through the mail. And we would get their addresses and would send them a copy of our magazine. And in the magazine, we would have ads that were geared toward pedophiles. Would have regular ads, you know, lovesick woman seeks a man for company and blah, blah, blah. But we would also put ads that said, woman with 2 children can't handle them, they need a man's guidance, that kind of thing. And it was stuff that a pedophile would pick up on. And a lot of them did. A lot of them did. Just from the magazine, we had 150 hits. And out of it, we made, I think, 110 arrests. And 110 people went to jail because these were minimum sentences on these cases. So everybody that we grabbed went to trial, went to jail. And an order went out in the department during the time, the 4 years I was there. I was being trained by the FBI psychological profile unit and other people in the field in that field. So I had some pretty good training and experience. So an order went out in the department that anybody that came across any child pornography in any kind of case was to contact me. And I would take the case over. I said, fine. So after 4 years, the strike force broke up. I went back to the department. I worked about 6 months again in sexual assault. Had some problems with the boss there and left and went to homicide. And I worked in homicide for about a year, and of course it was the banner year for Boston. We had like 150 homicides that year. Boston has very low homicide rate. It's usually about 40. We had 150 that year. We were bouncing from pillar to post. There was 3-man team. You get called out at 2 o'clock in the morning for a homicide in Canton Square. And we'd get there, and another one would come in out in Hyde Park. So one guy would stay there, the other 2 would go to Hyde Park. Another one would come in Brighton. So we were running all over the city. So I did that. I only did that for about a year, and I was promoted to acting sergeant and went back into uniform for a while. And about 6 months, and I worked in Southie and Dorchester. And I got called by the Attorney General's office. They wanted me to come up there and do economic crimes. And at the same time, I got a call from the District Attorney's office in Suffolk County. They wanted me to take over the child abuse unit. And I said, oh, geez, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I said to Marilyn, the first one that comes through, that's the one I'm taking. It turned out to be the Attorney General. And I had a nice couple of years there doing white-collar crime, where even the bad guys are gentlemen, mostly. Mostly. And when I referred earlier to stupid people rather than criminal. This was in 1990-91 when there was a real estate crash. Well, a lot of these young lawyers were settling cases. They get a check from the insurance company for your case, $100,000. And they'd take 20 of it, buy a condo. And in a month and a half, they'd sell the condo, make 10 grand, and then give you a check. That's how they worked it. Unfortunately for them, the bottom fell out of the market literally overnight. And a lot of them were stuck with these condos they couldn't sell. And the clients are calling saying, where's my check? Where's my money? Well, I haven't got it yet. Well, the insurance company says they sent it. And anyway, they would call the Board of Bar Overseers, and they would refer it to my office at the Attorney General's office. And I mean, they were, I often thought I would just like to go and say, listen, come, boom, give him a slap just for being stupid, and send him on his way. But you couldn't. You got to charge them, and it cost them, a lot of them, it cost them their licenses. They got suspended for a long period of time. It wasn't work I really cared about, but I did it. So where did I go then? No, I went from the Attorney General's office. I made permanent sergeant. That's what happened. So I went back to the department and worked for a year in uniform and as a uniform sergeant on the street. and I was a worker. I loved the job. I loved working. I get sent to Dorchester. I worked there. Dorchester was part of Area C, which was Southie and Dorchester. And whenever they needed a sergeant in Southie, they would send me because they knew I was from there. And I get over there, and there's nothing to do. There is nothing to do in Southie. I go out the door and have a cup of coffee someplace, talk to a few people, read the paper, look around, go out to Castle Island, see who's out at Sully's. It was terrible. So I would respond to a lot of calls. Now the department had gone into one-man cars. So everybody was out there by themselves. So when I heard a call that I thought might be a problem, I would respond to it. And I would kind of back up the guy on the call. And sometimes it would work out good. I had one case where a guy panicked and he called in a code 99, which means it's a hostage situation. So I was on my way anyway. So I told the dispatcher, hold off, let me see what this is. And I got there, I said, what do you got? He says, we got a guy in the building there, he's holding a razor to his wrist. He says he's gonna cut himself if we come near him. I said, he's not holding a hostage though, is he? No. So I canceled the code 99. I went in, the guy was in the bathroom and he's standing like this, and he's high on drugs. And he's got the razor up like this. And I went in and I said, hey, what are you doing? He says, I'll cut myself. Boom, I give him a slap. The razor goes flying, put the cuffs on him, he's gone. No hostage situation. So this went on for 6 months or so. And finally a guy approached me, one of the other officers that I knew from before. He says, Sarge, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, yeah, sure, Marty. He says, I got to give you a heads up. He says, the guys think you're chasing them. What do you mean chasing them? He said, well, every time they go on a call, you show up. It's like you don't trust them to handle it. I said, Marty, I only show up at the calls that sound like they could be trouble because they're there by themselves. But if that's how they feel, I don't want them to feel that way. I'll lighten up. So I stopped going to so many calls. From there, I got sick. I got assigned to Area B in Mattapan. And while I was working there, I got sick. I had cancer. I had lung cancer. So I had a major operation. They took out one lobe, and I was home recuperating, and I was out for about 6 months. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? I don't know. I can't go back on the street. You know, I get in a roll, and I get broken ribs and everything. So I was in headquarters picking up my paycheck, and I ran into Deputy Superintendent Anne Marie Doherty, who was a friend of mine. Her husband was a sergeant who was a friend of mine. And Tommy, how are you? And, you know, hug and kiss. And when are you coming back to work? I said, I don't know if I can. I said, I don't know if I can do the street anymore. She says, come to work for me. I said, doing what? She says, internal affairs. You get your detective sergeant's rating, you get a company car, and you get 10 hours a week overtime. And you get your choice of assignment after 2 years. Sound like a deal. So I went for it, and I didn't really like it. I liked part of it because I had enough street sense and basic knowledge of the job and so forth that if a complaint came in, I could kind of see whether it was legitimate or not, and it could kind of handle some of them. And a lot of people put in complaints, and all they wanted was an apology. And I would get whoever it was, the patrolman, if I thought it was that kind of a case, and say, look, I think I can square this away for you. You're going to have to apologize to this woman, and you got to do it face. You can't do it on a phone call. You got to come to her. And it was stupid. Give somebody a speeding ticket and call him a name while he's doing it. The guy's got kids in the car, so he's embarrassed that he get yelled at in front of his kids. And 99% would do that. They would agree to apologize. I'd go with them, take them to the person, this and that. After sounding them out to see what they wanted to happen. And most people didn't want anything serious. They just wanted the apology. So we did that way. We had 2 units in internal affairs. One was anti-corruption, and the other was internal affairs. Anti-corruption went after the bad cops, the ones who were robbing drug dealers, stealing their drugs, reselling them, that kind of stuff. There were a few of those. It was an extremely small percentage. And a lot of what they dealt with was guys doing sneaky road details. You're supposed to, when you do a job, a detail for a construction company, for instance, you're getting paid by that construction company. And it paid pretty good. I think now it pays like $50 an hour. And it's good for the city because it puts 1,000 cops a day on the street that wouldn't be there. And it works out good for everybody. But some guys would be doing an Edison job, and the gas company would open a hole down the street, and they'd walk down the street and say, where's your detail? They said, well, we called, but we didn't get one. Said, well, you got one now, and they give them their card. Now they got 2 details going. And another company would come and start up the street, and they go up, and they put it on him for a detail. Now they're getting $150 an hour for doing the same thing they were doing for 50. So that's what anti-corruption dealt with. We dealt with rules violations. Guys that were just angry or whatever, and did stupid things. Take a detail and leave it because they didn't like they were in a market, and the market manager said, aren't you supposed to wear a hat with that uniform? They didn't want to wear a hat. They had a $50 haircut. didn't want to spoil that. So they would have the gun, the hat hanging off their gun. Yeah, little things like that. It used to bug the hell out of me as a sergeant. I would go and talk to them, read the riot act. So, but as I said earlier, it's a thing that a career that I loved. I enjoyed doing it, and I got one more story I got to tell you about. Danny Gator. I was working in the Attorney General's office, and I got a call from Detective Sergeant Joe Fiandaca, who was the Detective Sergeant East Boston Station, Station 7. And he said, I'm really stuck, I need your help. I said, what's the matter? He said, I got a case involving child pornography. And I sent it over to the sexual assault unit about 6 weeks ago, and I haven't heard a word from him. I said, let me look into it, Joe. I'll get back to you. So I went over to the sexual assault unit and talked to the secretary, Patrice. She said, yeah, that went to detective and went to a female detective who really hadn't learned how to be a cop yet, never mind a detective. And she had it on her desk. I said, what are you planning to do with this? She said, well, I'm going to get over there as soon as I get a chance. I looked at the file. There's photographs of a little girl about 11 years old being raped by her mother and her mother's boyfriend. And I mean, it's right there in the pictures. If that isn't an emergency situation, I don't know what is. So I said, you come with me. I'm going to show you what to do with this. Went over to East Boston, talked to Joe. We put a search warrant together for this guy's house. And we had a pretty good information. There was another woman that they had tried to bring into their circle. And when she saw what was going on, she was repulsed and came in and talked to Joe. So we had a good witness and put a search warrant together. And I want to talk about search warrants because those of you who watch TV shows and watch Law and Order. And he says, holy cow, call Judge Murphy, get a search warrant. And off they go. I have worked hours on search warrants, hours, because you got to prove to the judge that there's probable cause that this crime happened and that the evidence is going to be in that room. My expertise was the fact that I had so much training and experience in the field of child pornography that I could state categorically they're not going to get rid of that stuff. That stuff will be there. They can't get rid of it. Their mental state won't let them get rid of it. And that's what we did. We put a search warrant together. We went there. We raided, I think it was probably 750 square feet, this apartment. And we came in. Another thing with search warrants, you don't really want to find what you're looking for right away. It doesn't serve your purposes. If I know if I have listed Polaroid, at that time, Polaroid pictures, and I come in and I see Polaroid pictures, I'm stuck. I can't go anywhere else because the Polaroid pictures are right there. So what I would always do is put in the search warrant looking for any kind of documentation to show that this person is in control of this apartment. So that would give me the right to go into drawers and every place else looking for a letter, a piece of mail, anything with his address on it. So I could search the whole place. Well, what we found there, we had 105 firearms, and this is in a 750 square foot apartment. 105 firearms of all types, ammunition, the whole thing, and the pictures. And the pictures were horrific. They were of this little 11-year-old girl. They had been doing this for 3 years, from the time she was 8. And again, getting back to my expertise, I don't get angry at that stuff because I can't. And I took him and I arrested him and handcuffed him and sat him down. And I talked to him and talked to him and talked to him. I gave him his rights, the Miranda decision. You've all seen it. You know, you have the right to remain silent, all that kind of stuff. And I talked to him. And I talk to him like I'm their long-lost brother. And I tell him, Danny, listen, I'm not blaming you. I know how seductive an 8-year-old kid can be. Because I'm a man just like you. And we all have the same emotions. And I would talk to them like that, get them every time. Get them every time. Once I get them talking, I get the details, I tape it, we photograph it, now they videotape it, the whole thing. They use that as training tools at the academy, how to do interrogations. Danny got years and years, I forget how many years, but he got a lot of years. And his girlfriend, the kid's mother, got a year and a half because she had a battered women's defense. And she claimed that if she didn't do what he wanted, he would beat her. And I guess some judge that allowed it. And so she did a year and a half. Okay? One last case. Same type of thing. I was on the federal task force at the time. I get a call from Bob Ryan, who was a detective sergeant over in District 11. And he says, I sent pictures to you over at sexual assault. I didn't know you had left. I said, what kind of pictures? It's the guy brought his car in to get worked on. And the mechanic went in the car. Well, the mechanic's looking for stuff to steal. He's in under the seat, and he found this guy's hide. And there were about 50 Polaroid pictures of 5 different kids, 4 girls and a boy. And they were in bondage. A lot of them were in bondage. A lot of them were sexually explicit and so forth. I went over the sexual assault unit. I got the pictures. I sat down and I looked at them, and they were all white kids. And I said, this is in the projects. It's either in D Street or it's in East Boston or Charlestown. It's, you can tell looking at the pictures that they were housing projects. So I went over D Street project, went to the school, got the administrator aside, showed her a couple of the pictures. She knew the kids, but they were no longer students there. They had gone to East Boston. I went over to East Boston. I say myself and my partner, who was a postal inspector, John Dunn. We went to East Boston. They had moved to Salem. We went to Salem. They had moved to New Hampshire. So, Maine. They had moved to Maine, Rockport, Maine. So we go to Maine. And this is how things evolve. We get up to Maine, we find them. They're living in like an abandoned factory that had been broken up into almost like stalls. And for power, they had a car battery with the wire wrapped around it, hooked to a lamp, so they had a light. And there were 4 girls and a boy. One of the girls was 16. She was living out on one of the islands off the coast of Rockport. I forget the name of it now. But we found her. We went out. We took the ferry out there and found her. Got a statement from her. She indicted the abuser was her father. And came back, talked to the other kids. Slowly but surely, they gave it up. The mother was dense. I can't believe the mother didn't know what was going on. But she claimed not to, and we had no way to prove she did. But I can't imagine that going on in their house, and the mother didn't know about it. So anyhow, we get all the kids, we get statements from them and so forth, and where is he now? We're trying to find him. He just left, he's going to Boston. So we race back to Boston, we pull into the Greyhound bus station in Park Square, and just as we get there, he's stepping off the bus. The 3 magic words, you're under arrest. We took him in, cut it down a little bit. He ended up going to Suffolk Superior Court. We indicted him on 138 counts of child rape. He pleaded guilty to 56. So he got 56 life sentences in Suffolk Superior Court. Then we took him to federal court because he had crossed state lines doing this. In the federal court, he got 35 years on and after the 56 years. So whenever he gets out of state prison, he's still got to do 35 years in federal prison. So that was a good one. That was a good one. That was a win.
And is he still in prison?
He is. I just checked about 2 years ago on two of them. I went out in Northborough. The same thing was, they had a group of guys doing his 11-year-old daughter. And I just checked this to see if he was still in, because he had a heavy time. I don't know what I would do if they weren't. There's nothing I can do about it, but I like to know when they get life, they get life.
Yeah.
So, and that's my story. And thank you all for coming. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
What happens to these kids, afterwards? Because that's what you worry about. I mean, if both their parents are involved.
A lot of them go right back in the same situation they came out of. A lot of the abusers are the mother's boyfriends, or male family members. And if she can convince child services, I don't know what they call them now, it used to be DSS, if she can convince them that that male is out of the kid's life, they'll give her the kid back. One family I had in Charlestown had two kids, two brothers, great little kids, and the mother was the abuser along with her boyfriends. And they get taken into foster care. The mother went to jail for a long time along with 3 or 4 boyfriends. And the woman who had them in foster care had one of them in foster care, and the other one was in another foster situation, got abused there. And she took that one also, and she ended up adopting them both. So they went from the projects in Charlestown to a nice home in Beverly with a lovely, lovely family, the two of them, the mother and father. So they were a success.
There's probably few of those.
There's very few. It was very disheartening because so many of them do go back in the same. I mean, I'm talking about, getting to the scene and saying to the mother, what's the guy's name? Well, they call him Henry. How old is Henry? I don't know. He'd be old. Yeah. How old is he? As old as me? As old as you? They don't have a clue. And they're not blocking us, they just don't know. He's a guy that came in and bought them some groceries or something and came to live there. And it happens quite often.
Can something be done, like here with these kids, like be able to, besides going to foster care, being able to send them, find a nice home and get them away
In a perfect world, yes, but it doesn't work that way. The parents still have a say in what happens to them. And in most cases, they want them back because it's a check. So, Max?
So much is in the news these days about all this, the police and the racial profiling and this and that. And were you ever aware of that going on? Was that an issue that you came across about maybe unfair or exaggerated police?
Well, I worked in a black neighborhood, so the vast majority of people I arrested were black, Spanish.
Because that's where you were.
Because that's where I was. But I have seen people get arrested that I think if they were in a white neighborhood, they wouldn't have got arrested. But a lot of times they bring it on themselves too. They start fighting with you. They start, bad mouthing you and so forth, and their mouth gets them locked up. But yeah, I've seen that. There's a certain amount of it. Part of it is because you just under this pressure all the time. When you work in a neighborhood like that for too long, it's hard to hold your balance. I can honestly say I don't think I ever did that. But, I was arresting people for specific crimes. So the race didn't even enter into it. Ironically, most of the people I arrested for child pornography and stuff were white. And most of them middle class. Yeah. The poor people couldn't afford it. Anybody else? Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
It was an incredible career.
It
Very
was.
interesting career.
It was.
Very interesting.